This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 57. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 2nd of December 2006. And today, the wind is howling outside of our studio here in Silverado, California. So, if there is some howling in the background, don't worry, you have not suddenly ended up in the dungeon of Dr. Frankenstein. You are still listening to your favorite podcast, the Project Management Podcast, of course. Now, are you struggling to get your projects done on schedule? Are you looking for a better, more profitable way to get things done? Then how about looking at critical chain project management? CCPM was developed based on Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraint, and it is the main topic of today's episode. We will be speaking with Alan Elder, PMP of NoLimitsLeadership.com to discuss critical chain project management. We look at why our projects are late and how the critical chain approach will benefit you. Today's episode is sponsored by Method 123. If you are looking for clear, easy-to-use project management templates, then look no further. Method 123 templates are ready for implementation on your project. And I know what I'm talking about here because if I had known about them when I was working on my company's methodologies a little over a year ago, then I would have used them and saved myself a lot of time. The complete PM kit costs less than $300 and it contains over 50 templates. To check them out, please go to thepmpodcast.com and click on the Method 123 banner. We have quite a long podcast for you today, but there is a good reason for it. But because it's such a long podcast, we are going to cut out the helpful resources. I have 2 announcements for you, and then we will go right into the interview with Alan Elder. Let us start out with the announcements of who has won a copy of Quentin Fleming's Project Procurement Management book. And the 2 lucky winners are Ajit Nadgir from Edison, New Jersey in the United States of America and Gabriel Garcia from Buenos Aires in Argentina. Congratulations to both of you, and Quentin Fleming will be sending those books your way soon. And now the reason why today's episode is so long. One of the questions that I have constantly received from PMPs listening to the program is, can I claim PDUs for listening to the Project Management Podcast or for listening to any other podcast for this matter? The answer is yes, you can. I have been in contact with the PMI about this very question since the first episode of the Project Management Podcast has gone on air. And over the past few months, I have worked with Tom Bates. He is the PMI's Certification Standards Supervisor. And on October 13th, 2006, he gave all PMPs the thumbs up that listening to project management related podcasts is a qualifying activity to claim Category 2 SDL PDUs. SDL stands for Self-Directed Learning. And to learn more about this, why don't you go to the PMI's official list of professional development units, and under the qualifying activities you can read what these Category 2 SDLs are all about. There are, however, a few basic rules to remember. You can only submit 15 Category 2 SDL PDUs for each certification cycle. Certification cycle is 3 years in duration, and you have to have 60 PDUs. So 15 SDL Category 2 SDL PDUs can be claimed for this. So the Project Management Podcast can help you to get a quarter of the PDUs than you need. You can also only claim Category 2 SDL PDUs for each hour of listening to podcasts on topics that relate to the knowledge areas in the PMBOK guide. That means if a podcast is not 60 minutes in duration, then you will have to listen to several podcasts that discuss the same topic and then add them up. For instance, you listen to 2 podcasts that are 30 minutes in duration on risk management, and you can claim 1 PDU. Now, isn't that just great news out there for all you PMPs? Listening to your favorite podcasts is going to help you maintain your PMP status. That is just fantastic. And of course, that's the reason why I have decided to leave today's interview with Alan Elder, it's about 1 hour long, to leave that interview in one piece so that you can listen to one podcast and claim 1 PDU right away. And now let us move right on into that interview so you can start claiming. Alan Elder is the president of No Limits Leadership, which is an independent consulting firm focused on accelerating projects through leadership, as well as lead instructors for UC Irvine's project management program. Alan has an undergraduate in telecommunications, a master's in project management, and a PhD in organization and management. In addition, he is a Theory of Constraints Jonah. Alan has managed IT projects for nearly 20 years, using both CPM and CCPM, ranging from small hardware projects to the largest student information system rollout in the country. Alan has also provided us with a white paper on critical chain project management. If you are subscribing to the Project Management Podcast through the RSS feed, then this presentation will this white paper, of course, will automatically download to your computer. If it hasn't downloaded, or if you're downloading the shows manually, please go to www.thepmpodcast.com and download it by clicking where it says to click. And now, enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview. Today, with Alan Elder, PMP, President of No Limits Leadership.
Hello, Alan, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Before we can talk about critical chain, I think it is important that we talk about the theory of constraints. Could you give the listeners a brief overview over what the theory of constraints is?
Yes, theory of constraints was developed by Dr. Goldratt in his original work, The Goal, published in 1984. And he's a physicist by training that got into ERP-type implementations in production. And in implementing his software, he kept discovering that they could make great gains in getting things done, but those gains would level off and make no more gains in the future. So he began questioning, why do we hit this limit? Why can't we keep making the same gains over and over and over? And his training as a physicist and a scientist caused him to use the same approach as a physicist to this problem in production. And over time, he developed a mechanism for addressing how to fix the production line. And that came down to, in any system, there is a single constraint, something that prevents that system from creating more of its goal. And typically, within a system, there's only one constraint. And so as a physicist, he began looking, where is the constraint? And that when he found it, if he fixed it, the whole system would do better. And then over time, he began to adjust it and discover that if you focus your attention on the constraint, that you can improve any system almost immediately and dramatically. And he began to develop his 5 focusing steps and put that into what he called the theory of constraints. Later, as projects were being done and people were using theory of constraints effectively in production, people began to ask, well, would this work for projects as well? Because a single project is also a system. Therefore, it has a constraint. And in projects, we would identify that constraint as being the critical path. It is the one thing that prevents us from getting done faster. So if we took the theory of constraints mechanism and applied it to projects, then we should be able to get projects done faster. And they did do that. The theory of constraints also contains 5 thinking tools that allow us to look at what do we have right now and what should we have in the future, and then how do we cause a change from what we have to what we will have. And those 3 steps of change are tied into the focusing steps of the theory of constraints. When they applied that to project management, we discovered a whole new mechanism for the scheduling as well as the human side of project management. That's what made the biggest change.
And is this application of the theory of constraints to project management then what we know today as critical chain project management?
It is.
All right.
Yeah, critical chain project management is an application of TOC, or theory of constraints. And theory of constraints has many applications. There's the production application, sales application, marketing application. So it applies to all elements of an organization. And critical chain is just one more application that applies strictly to projects. And as we go forward today, I'll go back and forth a little bit on there's critical chain applied to a single project, and then there's critical chain applied to a family of projects or multiple projects. And the way we manage a single project versus multiple projects is pretty different.
I've heard your presentation about critical chain twice. At the end of every time, at the end of them, I thought, oh, now I understand what it's all about. Now I understand what it's all about. And I think even today during the interview, I'm probably going to learn something new. However, you made a case in point that today's mode of operation, the way we manage our projects, that there are several areas that lead to our existing issues and that just don't allow us to finish our projects on time. Can you talk a bit about those?
Absolutely. One of the things we look at is in production environments, the enemy we're usually fighting is variation. Because we're doing the same thing over and over and over, we can eventually make it so well refined that it becomes variation or the difference between this time and next time that ends up being our enemy. So the work of Dr. Deming and Juran and many others in production have focused on eliminating variation. But once we move to projects, variation is no longer the enemy because we're doing things once. And so we don't have any variation. And so what is our biggest enemy? Well, in project management over the years, we've been fighting the other, what seems to be the logical enemy, uncertainty. But that's led to many problems. Uncertainty is a project management problem, but it's not uncertainty itself because we can't eliminate it. And that's what we've been trying to do for so many years. And the approach we've taken is we look at the symptoms and we try to fix the symptoms and hope that makes project management better. But we can see that it hasn't worked. In the last 40 years, we have the same problems in project management that we have today. I have books going back many years in project management. I can open them up. I can look inside the first chapter and it says projects are late, they're over budget, and they go through the list of all the problems. And then it says, do what's in this book and your projects will be fine. Then I open another book that's just published. First page I open it to. Projects are late, they're over budget, same problems with the exact same solution.
It's a selling point.
And it does sell. And so that's what we end up with, is looking at these same solutions over and over. And we all know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and anticipating a different result. So the critical chain looked at it a little bit different. And it's not about uncertainty and eliminating it. It's about managing the uncertainty. And so critical chain gives us tools to manage uncertainty.
What tools are those?
Let me go through those. To start off with the consideration of the symptoms and why it's important to look at the root cause is if we consider you go to a doctor, you're not feeling well, your head hurts, your body aches, you have pain in different places. When you go to the doctor, the first thing they ask is, okay, what's wrong? What are the symptoms? When you tell them the symptoms, the doctor doesn't sit there and think, how can I mask all these symptoms? That's not their concern. They're listening to each symptom and asking, how is this related? You're presenting with these 5 different problems. How do those 5 problems all come down to one common disease that causes all of those 5 problems? Then they give you some injection that will eliminate the disease and resolve the symptoms. Now, they don't ignore the symptoms, but what they would like to do is first identify the disease, treat the disease, then they can give you other medicines to help mask the symptoms while you're getting better. But in project management for 40 years, we've been looking at the symptoms and one by one trying to eliminate each symptom. A project is late, so let's do something about being late. The approach typically is, we had a project plan to take, let's say, 6 months, and it was late. So what should we do? Well, we hunt down the tasks that were late. We blame those tasks, and typically the people on those tasks, and then we look for more detail. So we say, this time we need more detail, then we won't be late next time. But you still are. So when the project is late the next time, we examine for tasks that have caused us to be late. Now there's more to blame because we have more tasks due to more detail. So now we have more tasks, and we want to get more detail on those areas, which means we have now more tasks to examine the next time we're late.
Begins to sound very familiar.
Before you know it, a 6-month project is a year-long project that went from 100 tasks to 10,000 tasks, and we're not getting any better. So the key principle of the critical chain and theory of constraints overall is, let's look at all these symptoms and find out where's the disease of project management. And a lot of it comes down to human behavior. When you really examine it, why are tasks late? Well, one of the reasons tasks are late is because it's human nature. If you give somebody 2 weeks to do a task, how long does it take?
2 weeks?
Exactly. Why should I hurry? And in human nature, we want to be seen as reliable people. So if I tell you it's going to take me 2 weeks, I don't want it to take 3, but then again, I don't want it to take 1, because I work in this organization, and I know what you're going to do to me if I ask for 2 weeks, and then I finish it in 1. Well, the next time I ask for 2, you're thinking, this person can't estimate. I'll just cut that down, and then I have less time. Now, if I'm late, you blame me. So I always look for as much room as I can get, but I don't really need that much room. But when I do the task, I know I have it, therefore it takes longer. Think of it as if you're driving somewhere, and you anticipate it'll take 2 hours. Then you get on the road and realize it wasn't that far. Well, then you're not in a hurry. You don't drive as fast. You don't drive as aggressive. You may stop off and get something to eat. You take your time because you have time. And people do the same thing on project tasks. So this is labeled under Parkinson's law, where it says that the work will expand to take all the time available. And again, that goes just back to human nature. And we have to find a way to eliminate Parkinson's law. The other problem we have is we let a lot of projects into our organization. And so I'm working on task number 1 for project number 1. Then along comes a new project, project number 2. And I'm assigned to a task on project number 2. And then project number 3, I get a task. And all of these start to overlap.
Bad multitasking.
Exactly. We get into bad multitasking because what do I get now? I have 3 things on my desk. And for each one of these, there are people waiting for it. And those people are yelling at me, where's my stuff? Where's my product? Are you done with task 1, task 2, task 3? Where are you? What's the status?
Yeah, and then I begin to flip-flop between them, and every time I flip and flop, it takes me 5 minutes to get reacquainted, and I lose time.
Exactly. And this gets frustrating to you, it gets frustrating to other people, and you start spending more and more time on figuring out where was I, preparing status reports on it, going to meetings to tell people where you're at and when it's going to be done and how much time you spent on it so far. And if you were to eliminate all of that extra work, you could have finished them by now. But you can't just eliminate it because people want to know, where's my stuff? And that's where the bad multitasking kicks in. We're going back and forth and back and forth. And when I'm working on task number 2, the delivery of task number 1 is being delayed. When I'm working on task number 3, deliveries of task 2 and 1 are being delayed. Then I switch back to 1 while 2 and 3 are delayed. So all of my tasks, other than the one I'm working on, is being delayed, which means the person that receives them can't work on them yet. So they are trying to find busy work, because if they're caught not working, well, that would really make them suffer. So they have to look busy. Then they get involved in something, and if I do finish and pass it on to them, now they're not ready for it. So it sits on their desk while they try to finish up one of their tasks to get back to the one I just finished for them, that they've been yelling at me about for 2 weeks. So the bad multitasking is the other biggest problem. As a matter of fact, by eliminating bad multitasking, we can usually speed up tasks and projects considerably.
So don't give people tasks from 2 or 3 projects. Give them just one task from one project.
One task. I have a client right now I'm working with in the government of Orange County, and they had a lot of problems with tasks taking a long time to get done. And they said, well, what do we do? Should we force these people to work faster? Should we get overtime? And they're looking at the typical symptomatic view of how to get rid of it. In other words, they have a lot of tasks and they're not getting a lot of tasks done. So how can we make them get a lot of tasks done? Instead of looking at what's causing them to not get it done. And my solution was quite simple. I said, take away all their tasks but one. Like, well, we can't do that. They all have to be done. True, they all have to be done, and they will. Trust me. And I have a very good relationship with the client, so I didn't have to go into a lot of detail. And so that's what they did. They took away all the use cases that these developers had to put together, and they only had one to work on. Well, now when the programmer comes in the morning, they look at their desk, and they have one thing to do. Now, for anyone out there who does programming or any other type of job, sometimes it gets a little boring working on the same thing. So programmers, even if nobody's demanding somebody for you to finish up a particular task, you tend to move around a little bit because your mind wanders. And it delays tasks or code that you're supposed to be delivering. Well, when the programmer showed up, they only had one thing to do. They were stuck working on it. And they were told, you can't have anything else to do until this one is turned in. And then they started getting them done because they would get bored with it. They would wrap it up, and then they would pass it on for something different to do. And that started getting them done. And then they were fed one task at a time so that they could eventually finish them all. The biggest thing you face is the mentality of management. Well, gee, if they only have one thing to do, then how do I get it all finished? But go back to the example of having task 1, 2, and 3. Mm-hmm. If I were to take a task, and let's say each one takes me a full day, and I spend a full day on task number 1, then it's done. Whoever needs it can now use it. Then the next day I would finish task 2. Whoever needs it, they can use it, and so on. If I am multitasking, the problem we end up with is if I spend, let's say, half the morning working on task 1, and then the afternoon working on task 2, at the end of day 1, nothing
is done. Yes.
Exactly. So I come in the next morning, I spend the first part of the morning working on task 3, still, nothing's done. I spend the rest of the afternoon working on task 1. I'm finally finished. Now it took me twice as long to finish task 1. The reality is, in terms of time, it didn't take any longer. It's still a half day plus a half day is 1 day. The only difference is when it was delivered. Now, if you add setup time and think time, it usually does drag out much farther than an exact one-for-one exchange. But even if we eliminate that and say that a programmer or a setup machine or whatever took 0 time to set up and prepare for, still the worst case scenario is you delivered it faster. Nothing else would be impacted. Mm-hmm. Now we can also look at, well, which tasks should they work on? That tends to be the problem. Well, how do we prioritize? Well, who needs it? Everybody's complaining because they know it takes so long to get the result. But who actually is prepared to work on the output or pay for it? That's the one we do first. Then I finish it in the beginning of day 1. I pass it on. The next person can now start working on it. So what happens is task flow picks up. And now work is moving through the organization faster. And that is one of the elements that cause projects to get done a lot faster with critical chain, as opposed to our common method of doing management.
Right. Now we've moved kind of flawlessly from the problems right into the solution here. But there are out of the 4 on the list of problems, there are 2 more that we've skipped, and one is the student syndrome, and the other one is the integration. We looked at the Parkinson's law and at multitasking. So let's go back to the student syndrome quickly, and maybe also integration. And what's the problem with those 2?
Okay. Let me make one more comment on bad multitasking.
Okay.
Because this confuses a lot of people. Not all multitasking is bad.
Yes, of course.
It's only bad multitasking if somebody is waiting for the output. So if nobody's waiting and you've got 10 things, who cares if you switch? If that's what you need to keep your mind active, switch as often as you like. But if somebody's waiting for the output, then you must stop. That's when it's called bad multitasking. The other 2 things that kill our projects, one of them is called student syndrome. Anybody who's been to school knows how this works. You come to your first day of class on a semester, the professor gives you all of the material you need. Read these things, here's your textbook, here's what we're going to learn, and in 15 weeks we'll have a test. Now, do students run home and study? No, they have 15 weeks. Then there's 14, and then there's 8, and then there's 3, and pretty soon the test is tomorrow. Now we start studying. So now we put our effort into it and we get into the crunch time and we get it done. So that's student syndrome, putting things off to the last minute. It's not just procrastination. It's the fact that I have a certain due date and I have a lot of other things to do. And so I may go back and forth between them, bad multitasking. I may know I just have more time, so I use it up, Parkinson's law. But at any rate, I tend to push off the work until the last minute. And student syndrome is also the best example I have for people that complain it's hard to estimate how long a task takes. I would argue against that. Because what I have noticed with people is when they put things off to the last minute, and many people do, they are very good at choosing the last minute. They know when it really is.
Yeah, you know exactly when you have to start in order to get it done by the time you need to actually have it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And people have an uncanny capability of picking the last minute, working nonstop, no multitasking, until it's finished and delivering it at the very moment it's supposed to be there. I mean, the paper is still warm from the printer. And now they're very proud of themselves. And so when people say, well, it's impossible to estimate, I disagree. Some things, yes. But for a lot of the tasks and projects, we're pretty good at picking the last minute, which means why don't we just pick the last minute now, start the task at the last minute, except we, instead of making it so we have to work overnight and weekends to get it done, spread that time out appropriately. And then start at the last minute, finish it, be done. Then there's no grief, there's no concern about, I have to get to that, yeah, I know it's still piled up, and all the mental anguish that goes with knowing I have to get to something. So the student syndrome is actually a very powerful tool for us. The other part we have is integration. This is a damaging component to projects and project management in general. Integration is really examining the probability of dependent events. A lot of project management scheduling came from production, where we knew how long it takes something. Because I have welded a seam 1,000 times, I know how long it takes. So I can estimate it's going to take 8 minutes, give or take a few seconds, variation. But with projects, we're doing things once, maybe twice. Not enough time to really build up that understanding of the variation. And with the probability of dependent events, is what it really says is that what are the chances task number 1 will finish as planned? Then, after task 1, we have task 2. What's the probability of task 2 finishing as planned? So let's say we have task number 1, we give a 90% estimate of time. I think it will take me 1 week, 90% sure. People give a high estimate because, again, they want to be seen as reliable. Plus, they know they're going to get in trouble if they deliver early. And they're going to get in trouble if they deliver late. So they want to give enough time in the schedule that if anything goes wrong, they have time to fix it and finish it. So we get this big span of time of protection. Well, if task 1 has a 90% chance of finishing on time, then it has a 90% chance of being done on time. Very simple. If task 2 has a 90% chance of being done on time, then what is the chance task 1 and task 2 will finish on time?
What was that again? 0.9 times 0.9?
Exactly.
Is it? So 0.82?
Yeah, so you're going to get about an 81% chance that this thing will finish on time, or both tasks will finish on time. Now we add another task. Now we're in a 70% chance all 3 will finish on time. Then we add another one. And so it doesn't take long before you get down to a 0 chance that that stream of tasks will finish as planned. Mm-hmm. And that's just a mathematical reality. That's the way it is. You can't change it by saying you have to. That doesn't work. So in critical chain, we recognize that there is this statistical thing going on. And we want to incorporate it into our planning as opposed to pretending it doesn't exist. And that's the integration part of it. And if you read the PMBOK, it makes a statement in there that we have all these tasks connected together, but it's the integration of tasks that will end up causing you to be late. But that's all it says, and it moves on. It's basically, it seems like it's recognizing, well, this is going to cause you to be late, but oh well. And then it moves on to the next topic, which is frustrating. So integration management says, task 1 probability times task 2 probability times task 3 probability. That's where we get the probability of finishing the project on time.
So we have Parkinson's law, we have the student syndrome, we have integration, and we have bad multitasking. Exactly. 4 problem areas that cause our projects to be late.
Exactly.
So what's the solution?
Well, and you'll notice that each of those focuses on the local optima, the task.
Yes.
And project management, like production, has always been focused on the local optima. We have this mentality that if every task finishes on time, the project will finish on time.
Hopefully.
But there are hundreds and hundreds of tasks. Who's going to manage getting all of those tasks done on time? No project manager I know of has the time to do it. And does it really matter? Is what we want is for every task to be done on time? Or is what we want the project to be done on time? We want the project done on time, and who cares if the tasks are late or if they're early? The reality is there are statistical fluctuations going on.
One task will be early, one task will be late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the early will only outweigh the late if we permit it. And again, if we have a culture that says if you deliver early, I will punish you for it because you told me you needed 2 weeks, I gave you 2 weeks, and then now it's 1 week. So the next time we have a project, I'm not listening to you. I'm going to cut all of your task durations
I will never
down.
give you anything in 1 week. I'll give it to you in 2 weeks.
That's right. You've learned. You're not an idiot.
Absolutely. I'm part of the problem, obviously.
Exactly. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So focusing on this local optima has caused projects to take much longer than necessary. And if people read Goldrat's book on the goal, they'll see how focusing on the local optima damages a production company. It's exactly the same thing for projects. Project tasks are not deterministic. They are probabilistic. Therefore, we have to use the laws of probability to create a schedule, not deterministic laws. And that's where critical chain schedules make the big difference. So we don't look at the local optima anymore, the task. We start looking at the whole project. And that says some tasks will be late. Some tasks will be early. Let's make sure that the early tasks outweigh or equal the late tasks. So somebody's 2 days late, who cares? Somebody else ought to be 2 days early. If we're not punishing them for turning things in early, then we should get the benefit of early tasks. And then back and forth it goes. Now we know that in every task there's protection. People are not insane. They know that Murphy exists. Things could go wrong. So when they give us a task estimate, they say, I need 2 weeks. Well, in that 2 weeks, they're thinking, well, I probably need 3 or 4 days to get it done. But I'm working on these other 8 projects.
Well, now all the 4 problems come into effect, right? Parkinson's law, multitasking, integration, student syndrome, they all go through your head right there.
Exactly. So you start covering every one of them.
Yeah.
I need the extra time. I got the other stuff, bad multitasking. I can't get started on it right away, and so on. And so now they give us not 3 or 4 days, but they want 8 or 9 days. And they argue it's very reasonable. Murphy is the other big part of this, because they know something could go wrong and they don't want to get in trouble if something does go wrong. But because of student syndrome, they don't start the task right away. So the time that they reserved for Murphy ends up being in the past. So they give me a time saying I need 2 weeks with Murphy built in. Then they start late. When Murphy strikes, they're out of time. And then they come to my meeting and complain, well, I'm late because Murphy struck. Well, Murphy was built in, so why are you late? The other big issue we have is, does Murphy strike every task all the time? No. That means that if people are giving us more than a 50-50 probability of finishing on time, that 3 to 4 days, that almost all tasks should finish early.
Or on time.
Or on time, at the worst. If they're not all finishing early or on time, that means people are either every task is struck by Murphy, which I would get a different job, or
We are very bad.
we're using our time poorly. And so in critical chain, one of the things we like to do as a solution is let's take that 90% probability time and cut that time in half. That gives us the 50% probability. But as you know...
So what happens if I tell you then that my task is going to take 10 days? What are you going to do with that?
We'd cut that down to 5 days.
Okay, so what happened to my 5 days?
Good question. Let's talk about that. One of the key things about this, before we get too much into the cutting in tasks in half, is there's always a concern about that because I need the 10 days. And if you cut it in half, then I'm going to be late. And then I'll get in trouble for being late. So the other part of critical chain implementation is people are no longer held accountable for being late. As a matter of fact, there basically isn't late in a critical chain project. Schedules are a little different. Tasks don't have start times and finish times. They have a 50% probability duration. So you don't even necessarily need to share start and finish times of tasks with anybody. It doesn't matter. If you promised me it would take you 3 days to do your task, all you need to know is, here's your task. You can get started now. So let's shoot for that 3 days. It doesn't matter if that task is late because it's not your fault.
As long as I only have that one task assigned to me, and I don't have to multitask.
Right. So now you work on it for 3 days. If you finish, great. We move it on. Flow is increased. If Murphy does strike, then it takes you a little longer. But the question is now, well, won't the project be late if Murphy strikes on these tasks? Absolutely. Yes, we hope that projects will even out. Some early tasks, some late tasks. But that doesn't always work, particularly in the beginning parts of the project where there's a lot of unknowns going on. So in Critical Chain, after we cut a task in half, the half we took out is safety, protection against Murphy and my multitasking. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not going to require you to bad multitask any longer. We're not going to come after you if you're late. We are not going to punish you if you're early. So what we're going to do with that extra time in the task is not get rid of it. We're actually going to move it to the end of the project so that you can share it with everybody. That way, if you're not late, somebody else can use your Murphy time. Mm-hmm. If you do hit Murphy and you're late, well, you get to take it back from the end of the project.
Or if I'm extremely late, I get someone else's time.
That's right. You get to share their time, and hopefully they were early. The key thing is this is something we do with people, not to them. And so we have to tell people why we're cutting it in half. It's not arbitrary. We have to let them know we're not taking that time away, that it's there for them if they need to use it. There's always the concern, well, then won't people abuse that time frame? Possibly.
And I think it's also a big question of a change in culture in the company, because this is a totally different approach. You're suddenly not making people responsible anymore if they're late.
That's right.
And it takes a lot of trust.
A lot of trust.
Because I'm telling you, it takes me 10 days, you're taking 50% of my time away, and I'm going, what are you doing?
Yeah, it does take a lot of trust. And at first, the concern that people might use the buffer time, the time at the end of the project, the safety, arbitrarily. But somebody eventually will be late. They have to be, because that's just the statistics, the probabilities. And when that person is late and nothing happens, people start realizing, hey, wow, I didn't get in trouble for that. I'm 2 days late. Nobody said a word. In fact, they went out of their way to help me, get me more energy, get me more time, get me more people, more resources, so that I could finish up as quickly as possible. All of my other tasks were taken away, so I don't have to do any other work, no bad multitasking. So I realize if I'm late, I get support, I don't get in trouble for it. And then other people start to believe it over time. The problem with project managers and executives in general is when they first start to see people are not trusting it, is they may suddenly go back on it themselves. Well, they say, well, this isn't working. We knew it wouldn't work, and they have a very theory X point of view, and then they stop it, and people say, wow, I knew it wouldn't work. And then, of course, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
We could go through 20 minutes of leadership psychology principles to explain all of that.
All right.
So we cut the time in half. We put the safety at the end. We no longer punish people. We let them work on one task at a time until done. No bad multitasking. We've eliminated Parkinson's because once your task is supposed to start, it's the last minute. You have no time built in. And so you realize as soon as you get it, you have a 3-day task, and you know in your heart of hearts it's going to take 3 full days to get it done. You get right away going. You can't delay on this thing. And when it's finished, you move on to the next task. So this eliminates those 4 problems, but it takes a global view by putting all of the energy back into the end of the project for safety and sharing it with everybody, as opposed to a task-by-task basis. The hardest part for project managers to get used to is the schedule is now different than they're accustomed to. We don't have all these start and stop times for tasks. I'm not constantly focused on, I have 9 tasks that are supposed to start today. Did they all start? And if not, I got to go do something about it, because it doesn't matter. What I do want to know is that safety time at the end. Is there still enough left over to protect me? One thing people will find is that once you take all the safety out of the tasks and you move it all to the end of the project to create this thing called the completion buffer, then so far the project is the same length in time. Mm-hmm. So let's say all of your tasks took 2 weeks long. You cut 1 week out from all of them. You took all those weeks, you put them at the end, and the project's the same length. Do we need that much safety at the end? Because let's say we had with the safety taken out, it was a 3-month project. That means you would have 3 months of buffer. which is an absurd amount of time.
Yeah, how do you
for a
tell
buffer.
management? I mean, if management looks at my schedule like that, they're going to go, you must be crazy. You're going to get 2 weeks of this buffer and not 3 months.
Exactly. And you don't need the 3 months is the wonderful thing. Now remember, as you and I spoke about, some tasks will finish early, some will finish late. So a lot of the fluctuations will balance out, but not all of them. So let's take that safety, that 3 months of safety, and cut it in half. So it's 50% of its normal size.
Oh, so you even cut the safety at the end in half?
Right.
Okay, so you cut the estimation in half, you take the half, 50%, and add it all up to the safety, and then you cut the safety in half as well.
Exactly. So now your safety is only half as long as it was.
Yes.
This works because, again, statistically, you'll have some balancing out and some early, some late, so you don't need as much protection as you needed in each and every task. By the time you're done with a 50% buffer, you will not have used it all. Now, this project is now considerably shorter than the original, which is a good thing. Because we do a project to get benefits, we're going to get them faster. So that's a great thing about it. Even a 50% buffer, it's turned out in practice, is way too big usually. In the beginning, it's best people stick to that 50% size buffer because they're going to need it. Mainly, as you said, there's little trust. And so there's going to be some game playing here to see if you're real. And you're going to use up more of the buffer. Don't let that worry you. As the team gets used to it and they realize they're not going to be punished, this is a good way of doing business, you'll use less and less of the buffer. And then using a method called sum of squares gives you a much smaller buffer that is more realistic. Then in the end, what you would like is that at the end of the project, you also run out of buffer. And one of the things we find with people in implementing it is they look at that buffer space, that safety time at the end, and say, well, that's a lot of time. Nobody's doing any work. Nobody's assigned to anything. It's just free time. It's not free time. It's the time that people will use, the money that will be spent when things don't go as planned. And so as you get better and better, the buffer space will all be used by the end of the project. And that's the way you would really want it. It's like one of my favorite phrases from a movie that I can't recall, is the gentleman said his main wish in life is when he dies, his last check bounces. It's kind of with project management. Your hope is that at the last day of the project, you ran out of buffer. That's perfect.
Yes.
Any earlier, and you could have sold the project to be done sooner and got a better benefit. Any later, and you're late, and you miss your promise.
Absolutely. Let's take a step back quickly, and let's take a look at the company who's trying to implement critical chain the way we've just talked about it. How long does it take, usually, to convert from our conventional thinking over to the critical chain way of thinking? And how much effort is involved?
That's an excellent question. And the scary answer is it takes very little effort, and it can be done almost overnight. The real answer is it depends on the culture of the organization.
Okay, there we go.
If the culture says, hey, we're willing to try anything, you can literally be up and running on critical chain within a week. You take 1 or 2 days of training, you educate everybody, you convert your current schedules, you're done. Now we're using critical chain. It's that easy. The reality is the cultures usually are not that trusting. Normally we have to come in and they want to do it on a pilot project.
Yes.
Pilot projects don't work. The problem with doing it on a pilot project is we're saying all of the people on the pilot project are working on other projects. Therefore, on those projects, they're measured under the old method.
Yes.
On this project, they're measured under the new method.
Here we go, multitasking. Yes.
Yep, you can't
Makes sense.
split it up. It doesn't work. So it has to be wholesale, and that's the hardest sell of critical chain. People are saying, I don't know, I don't want to do everything. They have nothing to lose in reality. Worst case scenario, you leave the buffer at 100%, the end date is exactly the same, and it's not working, you switch back to the old schedule, you're done. Nobody knows the difference.
Do we have any case studies from companies that have implemented critical chain?
There are hundreds and hundreds of good case studies. Some of my clients, we typically see a 30 to 50% reduction in time of doing a project,
Wow.
which is dramatic. And this is on the first project, too. This is not 2 years from now when everybody gets used to it. It's on the very first project they try it with.
Why don't more companies use critical chain?
Culture change.
Ah,
It is very
Once
difficult.
again.
Yes. And Goldratt himself, who created all of these processes, to this day continues to fight and to battle with the culture change issues. So it's taking a lot longer than it should. But over time, more and more companies are discovering it. Navy shipyards are using critical chain exclusively now because they realize they can get a submarine rebuilt in half the time it used to take. And the budgets are way less as well. Everything we talk about in terms of the using the buffers for time works identical with buffers for money. So you'll also come in on the appropriate budget as well. And of course, finishing anything faster is going to save you time and increase revenues. So getting the culture change is the hardest part. I find small companies, 50, 60 people, they can do this next day. The bigger the company gets, the harder and harder it is.
I mean, is that all there is? I give you my estimate, you cut it in half, you take 50% of my half and add it at the end as a buffer, and that's it?
That's the basics.
Okay.
But there's more.
I thought there had to be.
Yeah. Because the big question is, well, that's how I plan a project. And now we've talked about the human behavior side that allows it to work. But how do I measure the project? I mean, how do I know how well it's doing now? And the buffers give you the best possible reporting method because it's real reporting, real status, as opposed to what we're doing today. Today we measure things based on how many tasks were supposed to be done versus how many are done. So we treat all the work equal. Even though in the critical path method, we identify a critical path and we give it some significance, we don't manage to it well. And even our current performance management tools, such as Earned Value, it looks at all the tasks equally. It doesn't discriminate for the critical path. So progress is only occurring if the critical path, or in critical chain, we call it the critical chain, because it includes all of the task dependencies as well as all the people resource dependencies. So it's kind of like a leveled critical path schedule, but a little bit different. And in critical chain, there's only progress if the critical chain is making progress. No matter how many other tasks are being done, we don't consider that progress. It's nice, but it's not real progress. So if you're a project manager, you can only say the project is progressing if you are completing critical chain tasks. And that has some significance to us because what happens if a task on the critical chain or critical path is blocked? We're having problems, we can't finish it. How do we show progress at the next meeting? Well, get other tasks done. So the project manager and the team starts focusing on non-critical path or critical chain activities so they can show some progress. That way we can at least say we're more done. But there's more tasks off the critical path or critical chain than there are on it.
Yes.
So we can show 60, 70% of this project is done. But if the critical path isn't done, the project isn't done. So it doesn't make any difference. It's just fantasy numbers. In critical chain, it doesn't matter how many tasks you did over the weekend. If they weren't on the critical path, critical chain,
It doesn't count.
it doesn't count. You made no progress. I'm like, well, wait, we did 50 other tasks. So what? They don't get us done sooner. So there was no progress. So what it does is it forces the project manager to focus on tasks on the critical chain.
Do everything you possibly can to move those tasks forward.
Exactly. So we subordinate everything to the constraint. And that
There we
means,
go again. Theory of constraints, right? Takes us right
Exactly.
back. Okay.
And that step one of the theory of constraints is identify the constraint, which is the critical chain, the longest path of tasks with resources considered through the project. Step number two is subordinate everything else to that decision. So nothing is more important than those tasks. Now we can see if we're making progress. But then there's another step. How do I report status on my project? And the status comes into the percent of the buffer that's been used versus the percent of the critical chain done. So if I'm 30% done with my critical chain and I'm only using 5% of my buffer, I'm doing very well.
Of course.
If I am 30% done with the critical chain, but I am 60% used in my buffer, I'm in big trouble. So I have to do something quickly to speed up the critical chain. And the buffers there's a completion buffer. That's the end of the project. It goes at the end of the critical chain, or critical path for people who are unfamiliar with that term. And there are other buffers as well. They're called feeding buffers. So anywhere another path of tasks eventually feeds into the critical chain, they get their own buffer. That way we can tell if another path is in danger of causing a delay in the critical chain
Yes.
where they integrate. And so we have full protection. And we check all of the different buffers on a consistent basis. And how do we determine which task to work on? Priority is always one of the biggest issues. Shifting priorities. What do I work on next? Well, it's very simple with buffer reports. Any project that's using more of its critical of its completion buffer versus the critical chain done, then some other project gets higher priority. This is very simple.
Yes.
If a particular task on a project is using the completion buffer versus a task on a project that is using its feeding buffer, the task that is using its completion buffer always gets priority because it's the one that will cause the project to be late. And the simple way of putting that for people who are not keeping up in their mind is a task on the critical path that's causing the project to get late gets more attention than a task not on the critical path that doesn't cause the project to be late.
Yes.
So we always know where to focus our attention. And since I only get rewarded for tasks done on the critical chain, I put a lot of attention there.
Absolutely.
So projects get done much, much faster. To do that, it goes back to the behavior components of critical chain, what we call the roadrunner effect, meaning as soon as I finish a task, it goes to the next person immediately. And
It's like a relay race. Here you go. Take, run.
it is exactly the relay race.
Yeah.
In fact, some companies have taken a baton that
Oh,
relay
okay.
racers use.
Yes.
And whoever is working on a critical chain task
Gets the baton.
They have the baton. If you have the baton, you are freed of all other issues. You don't have to go do all the other company's stuff. You don't have to multitask. People have to leave you alone. They shouldn't bother you. You get total freedom to work on your task until done. And if you don't have the baton, then you're more open to doing whatever you want. People can interrupt you because what's the big deal? So this relay runner effect creates quick flow through the project. And what you actually find is the other paths have to start trying to keep up because the people on the critical chain, they're not multitasking, they're not doing other things, and they're moving very fast. And that causes everybody else to move fast to keep up. And that causes the project to finish sooner.
While we're talking about measuring, I got a question sent in from one of our listeners here, and his name is Josh Nankiville, and he writes, I'm personally curious about how earned value management has been or could be used in conjunction with critical chain. It seems to me that they are mutually exclusive, and when I've read about them being used together, it's usually that the project manager uses critical chain and buffer management to actually run the project, but uses earned value management reporting for the external stakeholders that require it. I sent this question to you, and you said, what a great question. I hope I can answer that under an hour. Do you have a 3-minute answer for us today?
Yeah, and the biggest thing it comes down to is how are we using earned value? Earned value is currently being used as a performance management tool. In other words, it drives operational day-to-day work. But earned value is a measurement tool that's used for conformance, and that makes a big difference. If earned value is continued to be used as a conformance tool, then we can look at what happened. But that's all it's really telling us.
Yes.
The problem we have is we're using CPI and SPI to measure. And because these indexes, the way they are designed, again, it goes back to all work is treated equal. But work on a project is not equal. Work on the critical chain is making progress. Work everywhere else is not making progress. So the buffers discriminate on the critical chain for speed. So day-to-day decision making should be coming from buffer reports. And once project managers see them and learn how to use them, they wouldn't want it any other way, because they can make real day-to-day priority decisions, where with earned value, you're unable to do so.
Absolutely, because even if you work on a project task that is not on the critical chain, you increase your earned value reports.
Exactly.
You improve them or you make them worse.
Right.
And even if nothing happens on the critical chain, yes, makes sense.
Yeah, if you get a report that your SPI is now, let's say, 0.8.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. I better go fix it. Where do you fix it?
Good question.
You have no idea. You have to go investigate. Where's it coming from?
But if I see that my buffers are running low, I know exactly where to focus.
Exactly.
On the critical path.
A buffer is on a path.
Yes.
One task to one task to one task. Buffer is having a problem. It's the task that's currently being worked on. That's it. If it's on the completion buffer, it's one of the critical chain tasks. If it's on one of the feeding buffers, it's the current task in that feeding chain. I know exactly where the problem is. I can go fix it now. Mm-hmm. And with the earned value, it doesn't give you any of that. You have to now go investigate. Where could it possibly be coming from? And you can hide it for a long time. Because again, if I'm having problems on my critical path and I have to report my earned value numbers and don't want to get in trouble.
Just keep working on the stuff that's not on the critical path.
Exactly. Get more tasks done. Get something done. Anything done. Anywhere. So my numbers come out right. And I start hiding it, and this is the symptoms. I'm taking cough medicine and I'm taking aspirin so nobody notices I'm sick. But eventually the disease kills me.
Right. So it makes quite a lot of sense that what Josh writes here, that the project manager internally uses critical chain and buffer management to manage the project, but externally uses earned value to report progress because his external customers may require that particular form of reporting.
Exactly.
Okay.
If critical chain is implemented well, you don't really need earned value in the same way that we've always used it. Mm-hmm. But a lot of companies require it still, and that probably will continue for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Some software packages, Spherical Angles, CC Pulse, has it actually built in a mechanism to use buffer reports and create earned value reports at the same time. And it does this through some pretty fancy moving stuff around. But at least it's all built in now. You don't have to keep two sets of books. Yeah. And I'm not against earned value, because I do think if I'm spending $20 billion, I have a right to know where in the heck it's being spent.
Know something about the project, yes.
And I don't really care if it's off by 2 days from some task on some project. Who cares? The people reading the EVM reports, they don't care. I just want to know my money's being spent well. But using earned value as a project management tool is not even possible.
Where can people and project managers who listen to this learn more about critical chain? What websites would you recommend? Or what books would you recommend?
Books I would recommend more than websites.
Okay.
Every website that I know of focuses on hire me. So I don't want to send you there because I want you to hire me instead. But some of the books that are really good, there is a book titled Critical Chain by Eliyahu Goldratt. It does not give you enough information to implement it. What it does do is give you enough information to understand why it works. So I really recommend people start there. And it's a novel, so it's interesting to read. And by the time you're done, it only takes maybe a day or two. It's a very simple book. You think, I can see why that would work. Now I want to know, how does it work? Now I would pick up probably Larry Leach's book called Critical Chain Project Management. It's in its second edition. It's very well written, and it gives you a lot of the step-by-steps, includes some buffer management components. If you're in software project management, the book Agile Management, Using the Theory of Constraints for Software Projects, is probably the best approach to be there. But if you get either of those 2 second books first, it may blow you away, and you'll give up thinking about it. Because you really need some background thinking, which the Critical Chain book by Goldratt provides.
While talking about books, let's talk about the PMBOK guide. Like you said, it doesn't mention critical chain at all. Why do you think is that? Have we not yet gotten it into our head? I mean, the PMBOK guide starts to talk about Six Sigma a little bit, but not yet critical chain. Is that something that's coming in the future?
Well, in the newest release, we get 1 paragraph for critical chain.
Good.
Which isn't very well explained either. And, I mean, the person who wrote it knows what they're talking about, but I think the editing process is not real friendly with the whole mechanism. So we did make it this time.
Okay.
In the newest release.
I've read it. I don't even recall it. Where is it?
See, that's how big the chapter is.
Is it under time management?
It is in time management. Towards the end, there's one little blurb that says, and there's critical chain.
Oh gosh, I don't even recall that.
So it's finally in there. So I'm glad you brought up, how about the PMBOK? Because I used to get, well, I don't want to do it because we have to be PMBOK certified in our project management.
Now it's in there.
And I can say, well, you would be. And so it's very exciting. But the Navy, the Marine Corps, a lot of other big companies are, in fact, almost all of the Fortune 500 companies have critical chain projects going on. So I think it's a matter of time before it replaces critical path on most projects. Critical path will remain popular in areas that are a little more deterministic, where we have a very reliable data, and the projects are so similar to the last one that we really do know how long it takes to do a task. But these other projects, software particularly, and so on, I think are all going to eventually move over.
In conclusion, what needs to happen going forward before we have some way in our day-to-day project management to be able to deliver projects on time, every time?
The very first place to begin is probably to have the executive management group have a half-day education program on critical chain. Then you can probably take your project managers and give them a 1 to 2 day class on the whole process. That way they can learn how to do it. With a 2-day class on critical chain, current project managers, PMPs, could implement critical chain and have success. They would run into a lot of obstacles that would irritate them, but they could do it on their own. The other option, of course, is you can go out and get consultants and bring them in and charge you a fortune. That may or may not be the right approach. The other obstacle people are going to have is your current software doesn't support critical chain schedules. So you'll have to get plugins for MS Project or buy specific software that does critical chain scheduling. With most of my clients, we begin using no software. We use MS Project to put the original schedule in, but then we manage it a little bit different, and so they can see that this works. And once they see, wow, this project that did take me a year just to get to this point, we're going to finish it in the next 6 months, they're pretty excited about that.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time so far. Mm-hmm. As you may know, I always end my interviews with the same 10 questions. So let's move on to the final 10 questions here. Number 1, what was your favorite project? Is it one that has to do with critical chain by any chance?
Actually, my favorite project did not use critical chain because I was working within a culture that was not accepting of it. I did my best, but what can you do? And it was creating a multimedia lab that included training people on all forms of cabling, fiber optic systems, and telecommunication mechanisms. So I spent about a year doing that, and that turned out to be one of the best labs in the country at that time. So that was my favorite project.
Number 2, what project would you like to have managed?
Creating MS Project 2007.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Number 3, what is your favorite project management book? If you've written your own, they don't count, of course.
My favorite books, again, are Critical Chain Project Management by Lawrence Leach. My other really favorite book is Breakthrough Technology Project Management by Bennett Lentz. This is a remarkable book. It's not critical chain, but their approach to handling portfolios, I think, is top-notch.
Okay, I have to go back to question 2. I have to ask you this. Why MS Project 2007?
So it would work.
Moving on with question number 4. What is the topic of the next seminar that you're planning to attend?
I use an instrument called Personal Strengths SDI, Strength Deployment Inventory, and they have a class on project management using this it's not a personality, it's a relationship-based tool, and I'm going to go take that because I believe that leadership and relationships are the key to getting projects through the culture problem.
Number 5. What is the best way to make a project fail?
Don't communicate with people. Sit in your office and look at your spreadsheets and your project schedule, and it's sure to fail.
Number 6. How do you like to celebrate a successful project?
I like to give the team time away from projects to go do whatever they want, work on other stuff, have a little bit of energy before they have to start working on somebody else's work.
Number 7. In your projects, where do you focus most of your attention in order to be successful?
Communicate. About 6 hours a day I should be communicating.
Number 8. If you weren't a project manager, what would you like to be?
I'd love to be a philosophy professor.
Number 9. What is the one thing that a project manager cannot live without?
Information.
Number 10. Finally, the oldest question in project management. What's more important in a project manager? Is it project management expertise or is it industry expertise?
Can I twist this one a little bit?
Go ahead.
I would say neither.
Interesting.
I think leadership expertise, leadership capability is number 1. I've worked for people that know nothing about the domain of the work, have never had project management training, but they really knew how to get people moving and stay with the project. And everybody else's expertise steps up to the plate. By my choice, we'd have all 3, but given one, I'd stick to leadership.
Great answer. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your stopping by and talking to us about critical chain.
Thank you.
And that was our interview with Alan Elder on critical chain project management. Please remember that PMPs who are listening to this interview can now claim 1 full Category 2 self-directed learning PDUs for the continuing certification of their credential. Let me once again remind you also that you will find a link to purchase the books that Alan has mentioned during the interview and that every one of our interview guests has mentioned on our website. Tune in again in 2 weeks for our next episode. I have still 2 interviews lined up for you. One is about dysfunctional teams, and the other one is about service-oriented project management, and you're going to have to come back to see which one it's going to be. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com and now also at www.pmprepcast.com, or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And when you stop by at thepmpodcast.com, please don't forget to click on the link labeled PM Templates to increase your productivity on the left-hand navigation. These are best practice templates that will benefit your project. And finally, we have this. Good project managers admit mistakes. That is why you so rarely meet a good project manager. Until next time. Are you studying to take the PMP exam? Are you tired of reading the PMBOK guide yet? Wouldn't it be great if you could use your MP3 player to prepare for the exam? Well, now you can by listening to the Project Management Prepcast. I am Cornelius Fichtner, the host of the Project Management Podcast, and now also the host of the Project Management Prepcast. In this new program, I will systematically get you acquainted with the tools and techniques, methodologies and theories to help you feel ready to sit for the PMI's Project Management Professional exam. It's never been easier, and trust me, it's much more entertaining than the PMBOK guide. And the even better news, it's free until January 2006. So go ahead and listen in today at www.pmprepcast.com. Together, we can put those 3 letters behind your name.